Hi, I'm John Hornick. Welcome to Lesson 71 of Chef's Apprentice, Learning to Cook Like a Pro, one small plate at a time. This lesson is asparagus soup with Parmesan custard. If you love asparagus as I do, this is the soup for you. Even better, the soup's deep asparagusy taste is complemented by the dish's star garnish, a savory Parmesan custard. Here you will learn to make and bake a savory custard or flan using a water bath. Custards are often baked in Ramekins or other custard cups that sit in a baking pan with water that comes about halfway up the sides of the Ramekins. The surrounding water causes a gentle and constant heat transfer, and this technique can be used to make any type of custard or flan. After you bake the custards, you will unmold them. You might want to make a couple of extras in case one or two of them fall apart or break. The challenge here is to make perfect custards, unmold them, and place them cleanly in the middle of the soup. Techniques today are trimming asparagus, chopping, bringing to a boil, steeping, whisking, seasoning, and making a savory custard, unmolding custards, sweating a mirepoix, deglazing, reducing, pureeing, and adjusting seasoning, keeping warm, and plating. So let's start cooking. Okay, let's talk about the mise en place for lesson 71. We're going to need about 1 1/4 cups of grated Parmesan cheese, real Parmesan cheese. We'll also need to have 1 cup of heavy cream and about 1/2 cup of milk, preferably whole milk, but you don't have to use whole milk. Then we'll need to have 1 whole egg, large egg, and 2 large egg yolks. I have all 3 of them here in this little bowl. We'll also need to have some kosher salt, and today we're going to be using ground white pepper, not black pepper. We'll also need to have some butter to butter the Ramekins. Now, I think the description calls for 2 teaspoons, but you probably won't need that much. I'm going to use a wrapper from a stick of butter, and that may be enough. If it's not, I'll take a little bit more off of the stick, and we'll use that to butter the Ramekins. You'll also need to have about 1 pound of asparagus that's been cut into pieces that are about 1/2 inch long. About 1/2 cup of chopped onion, and about 1/4 cup of chopped celery. You need to have probably about 2 tablespoons of olive oil. We're just going to eyeball that. And then we'll need to have about 1/2 cup of white wine or dry vermouth. I'm using vermouth today. You can remember, you can always substitute one for the other. About 1/2 cup. We're going to eyeball that as well. And about 1/2 cup of chicken stock. Remember, we make our own stock in this course. There's a video on how to make duck stock. You just substitute chicken bones for duck bones. You can also go to my website, which is www.chefsapprentice.com, and there's a stock chart that gives you the ingredients for making any kind of stock. And finally, we'll need to have some red peppercorns that are either already crushed so that they can be sprinkled onto the dish, or that are already in a little grinder like this. Okay, that's all of the ingredients. We'll break, come back, I'll show you the equipment for lesson 71. All right, equipment for lesson 71. We'll need a chef's knife and a cutting board. We'll also need to have a paring knife. We'll need to have a medium-sized mixing bowl. We're going to use that to mix up the egg and cream mixture for the custard. You'll also need to have some Ramekins. The description calls for 6. The quantities I'm giving you are to make 6 of these Parmesans. If you're not serving 6 tonight, just keep them for the next day or later. They are really good. And I want the Ramekins to already have been buttered. I'm not going to show you buttering them as part of the lesson. So you want to have 6 buttered Ramekins that are about, these are 3 or 4 inches wide. You'll also need to have a saucepan with a lid. We're going to use this to cook the custard. A wooden spoon and a strainer. We're going to use this strainer a couple of times, so we're going to be washing it out in between uses. We need to have a rubber spatula and wooden spoon. Remember, sometimes things go through the strainer better with the rubber spatula, sometimes with wooden spoon, sometimes we switch in the middle when one's working better than the other. We need to have a whisk, and then you don't have to have a funnel, but I'm going to use a funnel to put the custard, the uncooked custard, into the Ramekins. It just makes it easier and less messy. And then we'll need to have a baking pan. We're going to put the Ramekins in this pan, partially filled up with water, and bake the custards in this pan. Also makes them easier to handle that way. Also, you need to have an empty tin can that fits into the Ramekins, like that, okay? The reason is that once these custards are done, they're not going to fill up these ramekins. They're only going to come up part way. And then what you're going to do is we're going to use the paring knife to separate the custard from the sides of the ramekin. Then we're going to turn them over and unmold them. Now, if the custard has to fall from that ramekin down to the sheet pan, it's more likely to break. So what I do is I use the paring knife, separate it from the ramekin, and then I put the can down into it on top of that custard, invert it like this and tap on it. The custard comes out on top of the can. You can then slide that onto the sheet pan or use the spatula to do it, and it's less likely that the Parmesans are going to break up that way or split. We'll also need to have a saucepan and spoon to cook the soup, and we're going to be pureeing the soup in a blender. We're using Ninja blender today. We will need to have a metal spatula and a ladle for plating up, and then we'll need some wide, shallow bowls. Again, we've used the wide, shallow bowls before. The reason is we're going to put in the soup, and then we're going to put that Parmesan on top of the soup in the center. To make a nice presentation, you want to have a wide, shallow bowl. If you have a narrow, deep bowl, it's not going to look as good, and the Parmesan may sink to the bottom. You might not even see it. Depends on how thick your soup is, and that's really up to you. And then finally, we want to preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Sometimes I show you that as a step in the lesson. We're not going to do that today. So the oven, before you get started, preheat the oven to 350 degrees. Okay, that's all the equipment. We'll break, come back, and start cooking. Now, we've made many soups in this course, so you should have that down pretty well. What we're doing right now is we are sweating the Mirepoix, which in this case is onions and celery, in about 2 tablespoons of olive oil, and they're lightly seasoned with salt and ground white pepper. And as always, we're just going to sweat those until they are translucent. Okay, our Mirepoix is translucent, and oh, by the way, you can make up this soup the day before. You can make it up earlier in the day. There's nothing new about making soup in this lesson. What's new in this lesson is the Parmesan custards. Okay, now what's the next step? We've done this many, many times. We're going to deglaze with white wine or vermouth, okay? And we're going to stir that up and let it reduce until what? Until it is just dry or almost wet. Okay, now we're going to add our asparagus. And just enough chicken stock to cover the asparagus. Remember, if we need more liquid, we can use more stock or water. And I have these just covered, okay? We may need to add some more liquid as it cooks. And then we're going to give light salt and light white ground pepper. Remember, a little bit of this stuff goes a long way. Stir it up, bring it to a boil, then reduce the heat, simmer it until the asparagus is tender, easily pierced with a toothpick. Okay, we cooked the asparagus till it was tender. Now we're going to puree it. All right, let's take a look. Oh, it looks beautiful. And you know, the last asparagus soup we made, we used the food processor. I think the blender works a lot better. But you know, it depends on your blender, it depends on your food processor. All right, let's strain the soup. All right, now is the time to adjust the seasoning. I think it needs a little salt. Doesn't need any more pepper. And this would also be the time to thin it if it needed thinning. But this is a good consistency. It's about the thickness or the consistency of canned cream soups. That's what you're going for. And so we don't need any thinning here. We just want to adjust the salt. Let's check that again. Okay, that's good. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to keep this warm until we're ready to serve it. Then we're going to bring it to piping hot. If you make this ahead of time, you put it in the fridge, you'll be getting it out shortly before you're ready to plate up, and you bring it up to piping hot on the stove. All right, the first step for making our custard is to bring to a boil the cream, the milk, and the Parmesan. Now, this is one of those situations where we want to do literally that, bring to a boil. We do not want it to boil, we just want to bring it to a boil. So I'm stirring it up. I'm going to put it on medium heat, keep an eye on it. Just as it starts to come to a boil, we're going to reduce the heat. Actually, when it comes to a boil, we're going to turn the heat off, and we're going to take it off the heat and let it steep. Just going to stir it up, bring it to a boil. Okay, our milk and cream and cheese mixture was just coming to a boil. We're going to turn the heat off, cover it, take it off the heat, and let it steep for 30 minutes. What's steep mean? Basically means just let it sit there. All right, we'll be back in 30 minutes. All right, now we're going to strain the cream and cheese mixture. Could we use it without straining it? Yeah, we probably could. It might be a little bit lumpy, but if you've stirred the cheese well into the cream and milk, you probably don't have any lumps, but you're just going to get a smoother texture by straining it. And we're going to push it through the strainer with a rubber spatula or a wooden spoon, whichever one works better for you. And remember, we always clean off the bottom of the strainer so we don't leave behind a lot of good mixture that we could be using for whatever it is that we're making. All right, the next thing to do is to whisk the eggs. Just make sure they're well mixed. We're going to add a little bit of salt, not a lot, just lightly salt, and we're using the white pepper, just a touch. A little bit goes a long way. Mix it up. Now we're going to do a technique that we haven't done yet, and that's tempering. Now tempering is to put something hot into something cold, and you do it with chocolate. We're doing it with eggs right now. Now egg whites cook at 145 degrees. Egg yolks cook at 155 degrees. We're going to take what could be hot cream, milk, and cheese mixture and mix that in there. Unless you temper it, meaning put it in slowly and let the temperature adjust, you could cook the eggs or scramble the eggs in the process. So what we're going to do is we're going to let the cream mixture run down the side of the bowl with the eggs, and we're going to whisk it at the same time. Whisking is adding air, it's also cooling it. Having it run down the side of the bowl is also cooling it at the same time that it's mixing with the eggs. Now, the reason that the temperature at which eggs cook is also the reason, by the way, that you cannot have hot hollandaise sauce. If you order something with hollandaise sauce in a restaurant like Eggs Benedict and you send it back because the hollandaise sauce is not hot, you're asking for something impossible. Because, as I said, the eggs will cook at a maximum of 155 degrees. They'll scramble. And that's way below the boiling point, right? So it's really not possible to have hollandaise that's hotter than about 155 degrees, especially since it takes time to get to the table. All right, so now we've gotten all of our mixture into the eggs, and as you get down near the end, you can mix it in a little bit more without running it down the sides of the bowl, because you have cooled the cream mixture, and you have raised the temperature of the egg mixture. All right, so we have mixed those well together. Now, next step is to fill the ramekins. All right, here we have the ramekins. They've already been buttered. They're inside of this baking pan, and if you can see, there's water in here. Water comes about halfway up the sides of the ramekins. Now what we're going to do is take our funnel and we're going to funnel the egg mixture into the ramekins, and we're going to have to divide this roughly equally among these 6 ramekins. So we'll start off with a smaller amount in the first few till we see how it's dividing up, and then we'll go back and try to equal out the amount in each one of the ramekins. All right, now we're going to put these ramekins into the oven and bake them for about 45 to 60 minutes. We want to bake until the centers are set, and you put them in the center rack of the oven. Okay, so the custards were in the oven for 80 minutes, okay, and we got a nice, beautiful golden color, and the centers are set. So we're going to let these rest for about at least 5 minutes. Okay, we're going to unmold the custards. First thing we're going to do is run our paring knife around the side of the custard, between the custard and the ramekin. Make sure you get it separated, okay? I had these resting for probably about 10 minutes, all right? And we're gonna, because I had enough of the custard that it comes pretty far up the ramekin, I'm not gonna use the tin can that we talked about earlier. I'm just gonna invert it directly onto the sheet pan and then tap on it. Oh, there it goes. Good. Came out nicely. And there's a little bit around the side here that didn't stay, you know, they became separated from it. That's fine. All right, we're going to do another one here. Again, run your paring knife around the side. And then tap it. There. We're going to do each one of them that way. Okay, let's ladle some soup into the bowl. Now we're going to take one of the Parmesan custards and we're going to carefully invert it into the soup. There we go. Beautiful. Okay, now we're going to give it a little bit of the twist of the red peppercorns, and there we have it. That's lesson 71, asparagus soup with Parmesan custard. You can see photos of the final dish on my Instagram, which is at Chef's Apprentice, Cook Like a Pro. Next up is caramelized shrimp with saffron risotto cake. Please remember to subscribe to my channel, and thanks for watching.